Hey guys, this is Anders with Atom Audio, and today we have the pleasure of talking with Caspar Bock of BABY Audio. And we're going to be talking a lot about how to develop plugins, what the process is like, and how you can go about developing them as well. So if you're interested, stay tuned to find out more. Well, cool. We'll just get started. And I think the first question I have is just a little bit of the background of BABY Audio and how it got started and what your background is and engineering versus programming and all, how those kind of worlds collided.
I have some part of my background in making music. So I played in bands since I was a teenager and I started producing music. And then as a professional career, I worked for digital agencies on the creative side. So I worked with creating digital products for brand clients like Volkswagen, the German car brand. And I was working in New York at the time and in this kind of treadmill where you have to just really hustle and work to make ends meet. And I was really passionate about music. And I thought maybe there's some kind of way to combine what I do professionally with what I'm really passionate about. That's where the idea to starting a plugin company came. And it was honestly more of an experiment to begin with, like a little side project. That's why it was called BABY Audio, because it was kind of like my baby on the side to try and figure out, could we make some plugins? Could we make this work? Would people even buy them? All those things. And then gradually over the course of, like a year, actually maybe even less, maybe like 6 months, it actually really kind of got traction. And I was able to do it full time and grow the company. But all of that kind of came a little bit after starting. It wasn't planned necessarily. It was more a passion project to begin with.
That's pretty impressive, takeoff within 6 months time of it being a baby project on the side to being something much larger than that. What was the first plugin that you made, the one that kind of grew the company so quickly?
It was the second plugin, I would say. So the first one was this little compressor called I Heart New York. We just released V2 the other week. That was like this parallel compression plugin that did quite well. But then the second plugin we released, which was only a few months after, because we worked on both of them as we were launching the company, that was a plugin called Super VHS. And actually the idea behind that plugin was, I'm obsessed with European pop music from the 80s and I actually wanted to make a plugin that had that kind of 80s synth wave kind of vibe. But what happened with Super VHS was that there was this big, demand for lo-fi plugins around that time. RC20 is a big example of that. And I think Super VHS, even though it was intended to do this synth wave 80s thing, it got picked up by a lot of producers who wanted a lo-fi coloration. It also got picked up by a lot of big name producers who started sharing it on their social networks and stuff like that. And that was the one that kind of broke through. We released that around Black Friday 2019, which was also very good timing. We didn't even really know about Black Friday at the time, that was such a big thing for plugins, but that just happened to be the timing. And it got picked up by some people and Plugin Boutique released it. And obviously they have a big reach and they decided to push it. So it was the perfect storm of a lot of things coming together. And then suddenly it actually went so well that it was still a bit of a gamble to eventually quit and do it full time. But I kind of felt okay, this is probably going to work if we just keep doing our best here.
That was another big question of mine, was what is the ideation process for a new plugin? There's been so many things that have already been done. How do you try to get as much outside of the box as you possibly can, making plugins and thinking through ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So originally, I think, honestly, it was because it was this baby project, I just wanted to do cool little tools that I would imagine myself using. So we did this I Heart New York, which was this little compression plugin that sounded really aggressive. And I thought that was fun. I almost saw it a little bit like little guitar pedals, meaning if we do a compressor, it's not that we want to make the compressor to end all compressors. We're just going to make a compressor that has a certain color. And then, you can always need another color in your palette, basically, as you paint your mixes or create nice soundscapes. So today, I think there are two components in addition to that. So we still have this idea that it should be something we would like to use, something that adds like a unique color. Maybe there's a million reverbs already, but if we can do a reverb with its own color, we still think it has justification. But the two additional kind of drivers behind the product development today is one of them is feedback from customers. So we get a lot of feedback on social media and emails, people that, write us, either they don't like something or they like something, or they have an idea for a product. There's forums on the internet, and we try to monitor all that and just see what people say about our products. And we actually, it's not like a quantitative thing where we do it's not like a data-driven process like that. It's more a qualitative thing where we just pick up different cues from people and we try and put that into our development process. So that's like the second pillar is user feedback. And the third pillar that I'm actually the most excited about now is I would really like to do something new. When we first started out, it was way more humble, which I think it has to be when you start out. But now it's more ambitious. Like I would really love to do something that hasn't been done before. And the only way to do that is to look at, so what technologies are coming out now that just weren't there 5 or 10 years ago. Like in AI, for instance, there's new things coming out. And so we've partnered up as an example of this with a university here in Denmark that has PhD programs for audio and music tech. And some of their PhD students are working for us part-time. And so we're really now, as a third pillar of our product development, seeking to do new stuff that hasn't been done, whatever that may be. And that's still also surprising for us to see what's actually possible.
That is one thing I've noticed with your company, that you haven't done emulations. You haven't been like, the 1176 of, this era is what we need to emulate. You just kind of have done these wild, different kind of products that I really love. And I think that's a really cool approach. So I guess my next question would be like, so you come up with an idea. How do you start developing that plugin? Is there certain programs that you use, or is it all built from the ground up with your team? Or
yeah, good question. I mean, that's also a little bit dependent on the product, but typically we talk about it, of course. I mean, brainstorm. Then we probably start out with a wireframe, which shows the signal flow and how we want the end product to work. So it's almost like the digital version of, like sketching on a napkin or something like that, so we kind of build out the basic structure of it visually first, at least with our typical products. When it comes to these more like research and development things, it starts in another way, but I can explain that later. But with a typical product like the ones we've released so far, that's how it starts, as a sketch of what it should look like and a discussion of how should it be powered and how should it be, what's the underlying technology. If it's a reverb, there's different ways you can make reverbs and stuff like that. And then we just get started. And there's not really an order to it or a structure to it per se. We just try different things out. And we also try and allow ourselves to change the idea of what the plugin is as we make it. I think because it always ends up turning into something slightly different than what you imagined. And if you have a very set idea of what you want to make, you sometimes lose an opportunity to do something even better. So it's a little bit of a messy process. We just, try stuff out, basically.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier kind of thinking of it like a guitar pedal where you're adding color to, a reverb, for instance. What does that even mean in the plugin world? Like, how do you add color to something? Is it, I guess I'm just coming at this from a very naive standpoint of like, is it just coding that you do, or is there a certain like program that you can kind of adjust parameters for how dark you want the reverb or et cetera, et cetera? Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. So there's different types of technology or coding, to use that word, you can use that will obviously impact how it sounds. So with a reverb, if you want to do an algorithmic reverb, you can do like an FDN or an all-pass loop. Like, so there are like different fundamentals of how to build a reverb algorithm, to take that as an example. And they will certainly influence the color of it. And that's the coding part. It's almost like, what building blocks are you making this with? But then there's like where it turns into more of an art form or an expression form, is what you mentioned when you say, let's make it darker. On top of these building blocks you have the ability, of course, to add a whole signal chain that's hidden underneath the plugin. And, we do a lot of that. So all of our plugins also have a big element of sound design to them. So there's actually like a lot of processes that anyone could create themselves in their DAW. Like you could take any like signal chain in your DAW and you could apply an EQ, a compressor, whatever you want to do. Like, and we do a lot of that. We allow ourselves to color it as much as we want. So you mentioned this thing about a darker sound. If we want something with a darker sound, of course, we like a dark sounding distortion, let's say, we'll of course start with the fundamentals of what kind of algorithm would produce that end result. But then when we have that, we're not purists either. If we want it to be darker, we'll apply a filter or an EQ or something like that under the hood. Like we allow ourselves to just like mangle these algorithms. I think there's probably developers that are very purist about it, who say that it's all about presenting some kind of algorithm and not really coloring it under the hood with processes that are hidden. We see it more like, I guess, like an artist or something, where we say, well, we're just assigning a curated sound or like, an idea of what a vibe that something should give. And we have a sound designer that works with us. And there's a lot of like hidden stuff under the hood that shapes how it sounds beyond just the core algorithms, if that makes sense.
It just kind of slightly off topic, but my favorite one that you guys have is one of the free ones, just like the magic diced one.
Oh yeah.
Where it's just like, who knows what you're going to get.
That one is a great example of a sound design approach, because we always say it has 50 effects under the hood and people go, well, that seems a little excessive, but it actually literally does. Like it's a super complex signal chain and not all effects are active at all times. But there's just a bunch of effects happening under the hood. And that's unspaced out, which is the lead product that Magic Dice is derived from. And Magic Dice just has this one randomization button. And it's the same kind of thing. So it just triggers like a bunch of different effects and randomizes it a little bit. And yeah, I think it's okay to take the liberty to just give people, transform their sounds, right? Like that's why you use plugins. If it was only about being purist, why even get third-party plugins? Like there's great stock plugins in all DAWs, and you don't really need third-party plugins for the utility. You need them to give you inspiration or to take your sound to some place. So that's our philosophy anyway.
Kind of backtracking, but you said that there's a couple of different ways that once you have an idea, you develop a plugin. And you mentioned a second way is more on the R&D side, and you said you would come back to that. What is that process like when you are doing the, I don't know if academic is the right term, but kind of that sort of different route from just a signal chain sort of approach?
Yeah, so that's very different. And we haven't released anything yet coming from those experiments, but we will. One of the things we're doing is pretty close to being a product now. Well, so with that one, it's more treating the person who's the researcher as the star of it. You know, like instead of us coming to him and say, hey, you have to do this and this, it's the other way around. We come to a person who is doing, in this case, like a PhD, studying like a very specific topic. And we say, so what have you discovered? Like what here could turn into a product that's different than anything out there? And then it's more collaborative effort where they give us a lot of the direction. And what we try and do is to say, well, we know what our users want. So if someone is a very dedicated researcher into some kind of topic, maybe the last thing they think about is making it very user-friendly. You know, like they think about all the options, they go out on tangents in their research. So I see our role in those relationships is just kind of curating it a little bit and packaging it and making it available in a format that's easy for a normal producer to understand, that's not too complex. But the development process actually starts with the person working with us and us giving them a chance to tell us everything that could be done. And then we work together with them to kind of harness and shape that into a compact product. We're doing a lot of that. Like, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here, but I have this, like idea that if you played music of today, of 2022, to someone in 1922, 100 years ago, and if they heard modern music, their minds would be blown, right? Like by how crazy it sounds today. So in this 100-year span, music has really changed so much. And if history is repeating, and oftentimes it is, then 100 years from now, music will also sound extremely different to how it sounds today. And I think it's exciting to think about being a part of that. Of course, I'm not like arrogant enough to believe we can drive that development or anything, but I just think it's exciting to know that music is always changing. And I would love to somehow just be a small contribution to that. So with these like R&D projects, we just try and find people that are doing really interesting stuff at universities, for instance, who don't have an outlet for that stuff because it's academic, and say, well, come to us and we'll help you package it and put it out there and hope that someone will discover it and do some cool stuff with it, And that's only just starting. We haven't released any of those collaborations yet, but it's coming out.
How is the process of developing like a VST instrument different than like an effect plugin, for instance?
Yeah, not too different actually. So we use this framework called Juice, which basically just allows you, to put it very simply, to make the plugin once, and then you're able to port it out into different formats like AAX, AU, VST, etc., without having to build separate versions per se. And within Juice, you can build instruments and effects, and of course, it's a different product, but the process and the code language and all those things are not different. So it's actually not too different in that way.
I actually think I piddled around in Juice like a couple of years ago, like trying to figure it out, and it was so far over my head. Is that kind of the primary program you use? Is that what you suggest people? Yeah.
And I think most companies probably do, at least new companies coming out. I think the thing with Juice is at least in our experience, if you make it work on one machine and you build it within Juice, there's so many guardrails that ensure that it will more or less be, compliant with a ton of different machines, Mac and PC, etc. Like it just feels like a safe environment like that. You kind of build it once and then you're able to port it to all these different platforms easily. You still have to build it though, right? But at least it's a safety net.
I think the primary audience for this whole video will be like people that want to start their own plugin company or want to know the process of creating plugins. So what advice would you give to someone that maybe has an idea for one or is wanting to get into this industry? How would you advise them to start?
Well, isn't there this saying for carpenters, like measure twice and cut once or something? I think I would do it the inverted way of that. I would measure once and cut twice. And what I mean by that is I would just go out and start something and then accept that there's going to be mistakes along the way. I think you can overplan things and you can overthink things. And we've only been around for 3 years and so much has happened in those 3 years that I had no clue about when we started out. As I said, it was just like a hobby thing I did to begin with. And it's really been a pretty, for us at least, crazy journey. And it started with having what was actually a pretty small idea and containing it into something very like easily manageable, like this little plugin. And then everything just kind of came as a result from that. So the best tip I can give to anyone starting anything, I guess, is to get something out there and don't be a perfectionist about it or don't overthink it. Just put it out and then you will learn what you need to learn as you do it.
You mentioned that you had done a lot of the UX and UI design of the plugins. How important is having a really nice, easy to use interface, but also one that kind of stands out graphically?
Yeah, to clarify, I do the UX part, and then
okay, gotcha. Okay,
yeah, the UI is done by our designer, but we work together on it. But yeah, I think it's very important. I think you and I talked about this on another call as well. That it's almost like in the physical world, you have hardware that you can touch physically, and in some cases, if it's analog hardware, you can smell it too. And it's very tangible. And anything on a screen, it already kind of eliminates a few senses. You can't touch it, and you certainly can't smell it. Like you can hear it, of course, and you can see it, but a lot of your senses are cut off when it's on a screen. And that means that the senses that are still engaging with the product need to be super engaged. And that's down to how it sounds, because you can hear it, and that's down to how it looks. You're kind of starting at a minus already because you don't have tangible knobs and tangible sliders. So it needs to really stand out. I think for us, design is really important, and we try to treat it almost like as if hardware never existed, or at least as if we didn't care for hardware. Like we try to treat it as digitally native our plugins. You know, some plugins, they're just basically like a picture of something that looks like a hardware rack.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, but it's just, you're on a screen, you can do so much more than put a knob there, you know?
Yeah.
You can make a control look or behave in any way you want. And I'm not saying we're perfect, because we also have knobs on some of our plugins, but it's something we try and ask ourselves, and something we try to get better at with every new release we do. How can we do something that's native to the screen environment and not rooted in the physical world?
You've mentioned a little bit about this, but what is on the horizon for Baby Audio going forward?
So we're making instruments now, and we're releasing our first synthesizer pretty soon. We actually have a few instruments coming up. So up until this point, we've only done effects. So we're excited to do instruments as well. And then we're trying to also release more, I think, starting 2023. So the past 2 years, we've done 2 plugins per year, and we'd like to get up to 3 or maybe 4 per year. So I guess the short answer would be more plugins, and hopefully better too. Like, we're trying to raise the bar every time.
Well, cool. We'll close with talking about the partnership that we're building here. For all Atom Audio registered users, you guys will be giving away the Comeback Kid delay plugin. Could you speak a little bit about the details of that, the design process, and what makes it special?
Yeah, so it's a delay plugin, and the utility part of the plugin is that it can do any kind of delay synced in milliseconds or in free timing modes. But that's, I mean, any delay plugin can do that. What makes this one different is you have a lot of parameters to shape the delay signal or the wet signal. So you're able to, of course, filter it, make it more analog. There's like a tape saturation. There's this phasing effect. We have transient shapers for the wet signal. And when we originally designed it, it was this idea to make a delay that does everything a delay needs to do, but then in addition to that, makes you shape the delay signal to make it very different from the dry signal. And that adds perspective and depth to the mix, because then you have 2 signals, like the dry and the delay one. And if they're different enough, they will fill out the mix nicely. And so that's what it is. You can really sculpt your delays, and it's a cool one.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to allow Atom Audio users to start using it and getting creative with it for sure. Well, I think that covers everything, man. This has been an absolute pleasure, and depending on when this video comes out, the plugin may or may not be available yet, but it will be very soon. But yeah, I think that's a wrap, man. Thank you for doing this with us.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure.